I never imagined I'd end up sharing this story. Life took an unexpected turn, one I never saw coming. My name is Emma, and I'm 40 years old. I've been a single mother for a long time, raising my son, Liam, on my own. Now, he's 22 and we've always been close, just the two of us, supporting each other through all the ups and downs. One night, something unusual happened. Liam looked exhausted and mentioned he wasn't feeling well. He'd been working hard and studying a lot, and it was obvious he was drained. I suggested he lie down on my bed to rest for a while. It was a chilly evening, and our house always takes a while to warm up, so I threw a heavy blanket over him. At first, it felt like any normal moment, just a mom helping her son. But then, as I lay next to him, I felt him move a little closer. I figured he was just trying to warm up, so I didn't think much of it. But then, he gently wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close in a way he used to when he was younger. I was taken off guard, but I didn't pull away. He probably just needed comfort. I could feel his warmth next to me, and his breathing was steady. As we lay there, I noticed his breathing slow down, like he was falling asleep. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. It felt strange, but also comforting. I didn't move, not wanting to disturb him, telling myself that it was just a mom offering comfort to her son. But after a while, he shifted again, moving even closer to me under the blanket. I felt his arm wrap tighter around me, and for a moment, I froze, unsure of what to make of it. Part of me wanted to pull away, but another part of me stayed still. There was a tension in the air I couldn't ignore, though I didn't understand why I felt that way. Then something happened that caught me off guard. I could feel something hard under the blanket. It was unexpected, and my heart started racing. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that he was just my son, and maybe he didn't even realize it. I stayed there, trying to push away the uncomfortable feelings starting to rise within me, telling myself it was just a brief, awkward moment that would pass. But as the minutes went by, I realized things were different now, and I had no idea how to handle it. Liam stayed close, his breathing steady, but I could feel the warmth between us growing. I wanted to move, maybe say something light to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. I felt trapped in that moment, unsure of what I was even feeling. Then Liam shifted again, lifting his head to look at me. His eyes held a softness I hadn't seen before, a look that made me feel both safe and uneasy. He didn't say anything, but his gaze seemed to ask if everything was okay. I tried to smile, hoping it would ease the strange feeling, but it only deepened the silence. Liam's hand stayed on my arm, warm and steady, and I could feel his fingertips moving gently, almost absent-mindedly. It was such a small gesture, but each touch seemed to spark something inside me that I couldn't ignore. I kept my breathing steady, trying not to let him see how fast my heart was racing. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stayed there, feeling tangled up in this strange connection between us. I kept telling myself that this was just a mom comforting her son, nothing more. But with just the two of us under the blanket, my mind kept spinning with thoughts that felt wrong, and yet I couldn't push them away. He was my son, but lying there so close to him, I felt something deeper, a closeness I didn't fully understand. I was confused, yet there was also warmth in the moment, an unexpected feeling that kept me still. Liam didn't seem to notice my internal struggle. He just stayed by my side, his hand softly moving, comforting, as if everything was perfectly normal. His breathing was calm again, and I wondered if he was falling asleep. Then his hand shifted again, slowly moving up my arm. I felt a chill run through me, and when he opened his eyes, he looked directly at me. There was a question in his gaze, as if asking whether everything was okay, whether I felt that same strange pull he did. I whispered his name, barely able to get the words out. I wanted to stop it, to create some distance, but somehow I couldn't move. The tension between us felt too strong, like a quiet storm building in the silence. Neither of us said a word, but the air around us was filled with unspoken feelings, things we both felt but couldn't bring ourselves to say. And then, almost as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he leaned in closer. My heart pounded, and my mind raced, but I couldn't pull back. I was caught between being his mother and the strange feelings that had come up. As he leaned closer, I felt my breath catch, and every thought faded away, leaving only that moment between us. Liam's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, his fingers lingering as if he, too, was hesitating. The world around us felt distant, and all I could focus on was the warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart that I could almost hear. For a moment, I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself. I told myself to break the closeness that felt so confusing and overwhelming, but then I felt his hand gently move, brushing a strand of hair from my face. It was such a simple, caring gesture, but it made my heart ache in ways I couldn't explain. I opened my eyes and there he was, so close, looking at me with softness and trust. His face was so near that I could see every detail, his tiny freckles, the curve of his mouth, the way his eyes searched mine. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that mirrored my own. I could see that he was just as lost in this moment as I was. We stayed there, suspended in the quiet, as if time had stopped. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and thoughts I couldn't make sense of. But my body wouldn't move. I felt drawn to him, this person I had raised, but in that moment, he felt like someone entirely new. Just as I thought we'd stay, the silence between us felt like it could last forever. But then Liam pulled away slightly, breaking the tension. He looked down, almost embarrassed, and let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. That little movement snapped me back to reality for a second, reminding me just how close we'd gotten. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the surge of emotions rushing through me, hoping he hadn't noticed. "Sorry, Mom," he muttered quietly, his voice uncertain. "I didn't mean to make things awkward." He avoided eye contact, and I saw a faint flush on his cheeks, like he was wrestling with the same confusing feelings I was. I wanted to comfort him, to reassure him that it was okay, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a strange kind of awkwardness I hadn't felt in years when it came to my own son. I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a small smile, hoping to ease the tension. "It's fine, Liam," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's just, well, it's been just us for so long. We're probably both a little out of sorts." He nodded, and I saw the hint of relief in his eyes, like I'd said the right thing. Just as things were beginning to settle, the doorbell rang, cutting through the stillness. The sudden sound snapped us both back to reality, breaking whatever spell had been hanging in the air. I stood up quickly, my heart still racing, relieved by the interruption. When I opened the door, I found Mark, our neighbor, standing on the other side. He'd always been kind, and someone I could rely on when I needed help. He greeted me with a warm smile, but there was something in his eyes that lingered just a little too long. That was when I realized I still had the odd energy from earlier with Liam. I tried to steady myself, hoping Mark didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. "Hey, Emma," he said in a friendly tone. "I figured I'd stop by and see if you needed anything. With the cold weather lately, I can check on your heating system if it's acting up." I felt a wave of relief flood over me and allowed myself to relax for a moment. "Thanks, Mark," I replied, giving him a smile. "Actually, the house does get a bit chilly. I'd appreciate your help." As Mark stepped inside, I could feel Liam watching from the hallway, his face unreadable. I stole a glance back at him and saw something flicker in his eyes. Jealousy, maybe? He hid it quickly, but it caught me off guard and made me wonder if he was struggling with something more than he was letting on. Mark moved around, inspecting the heater, and we made small talk about the house and the weather. But my focus kept drifting to Liam, who stood quietly in the hallway, watching us with an intensity that made me uneasy. The tension between us was palpable, and I felt caught between making small talk with Mark and trying to read the situation with Liam. His eyes stayed fixed on us, never leaving, making the whole scene feel heavier. After a few minutes, Mark turned to me with a warm smile. "Everything's good to go here, Emma. Just give me a call if you need any more help." I thanked him, and as he left, I felt the tension between me and Liam grow thicker. I closed the door behind him, turning to see Liam still standing there, arms crossed, looking serious. "You okay, Liam?" I asked, trying to gauge what was going on in his mind. He shrugged, looking away, his voice low.
"Yeah, I'm fine."
Just didn't expect Mark to show up, that's all. I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into whatever was going on with him. But before I could say anything, he walked past me and headed to his room without another word. The door clicked softly behind him, and I was left standing there, feeling a mix of relief and confusion, and a lingering sense of unfinished business. I stood still, staring at the closed door, the ache inside me growing. My thoughts were all over the place, about the closeness we'd shared, the way Liam had looked at me when Mark was there, and the unspoken tension between us. It felt like something was waiting to bubble over, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I went to my room and sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind replaying everything. I knew I couldn't ignore what had happened forever, but I wasn't sure how to deal with it. Just then, I heard a soft knock at the door, and my heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was Liam coming back. "Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Liam stepped inside, his face still unreadable. He walked over and sat down next to me, staring down at his hands. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. "Mom," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry if I made things weird earlier. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Liam, it's okay," I said softly. Maybe we're both feeling a little lost right now. It's been just the two of us for so long. Sometimes things can get confusing." He nodded, still looking at his hands. Then he lifted his gaze to meet mine. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place, mixing with the vulnerability that mirrored my own. "But it feels different," he said quietly, as if afraid to admit it. I didn't know what to say. My heart ached with that same confusion, and for a moment, I thought about hugging him, telling him everything would be okay. But I wasn't sure if that was what he needed, or if it would only make things more complicated. So I stayed silent, letting the moment stretch on. Finally, I took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. "Liam," I said gently, "maybe we just need to step back for a bit and think about everything. It's okay to feel close, but it's also okay to need some space to figure things out." He nodded slowly. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned his head onto my shoulder, just like he used to when he was younger. It felt comforting, familiar, but still held that strange edge I couldn't ignore. My heart softened, and I put my arm around him, pulling him close in a way that felt safe. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know where this would go, but in that moment I realized that maybe it was okay not to have everything figured out. We could take things one step at a time. We decided to take things one step at a time, figuring it out together, even though it was complicated. As we sat there, holding on to each other, I felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet hope that, no matter what, we would find a way through this. We stayed like that for a while, sitting quietly, as if simply being close could make all the confusion between us disappear. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The warmth between us felt comforting, but there was something unsettling about it, like an undercurrent neither of us could ignore. After a while, Liam lifted his head and looked at me, his face serious. "Mom, I don't know what to do with these feelings. I don't want to make things harder for us, but I can't just ignore it either." His words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken question that neither of us had the courage to voice. I swallowed hard, my mind racing as I searched for the right words, but just as I opened my mouth to speak, there was a knock at the door. We both jumped, startled, and exchanged a quick glance. The knock was firm, almost urgent, as though the person on the other side knew something was happening. A rush of nervousness washed over me as I got up and walked to the door. When I opened it, I saw Mark standing there, looking concerned. "Emma, sorry to bother you," he said, his voice soft but sincere. I wanted to check in. You seemed a bit off earlier." I glanced back at Liam, who was watching us closely, his face unreadable. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied. "Thanks, Mark, but we're fine. Just having a quiet evening." Mark looked at me, then shifted his gaze to Liam. His eyes lingered thoughtfully before he spoke again. "All right. But remember, I'm just next door if you need anything. After he left, I closed the door and turned back to Liam, who was still watching me with that same intensity. He stood up, walking slowly toward me. My heart raced again, the air between us thick with all the things we hadn't said. But just as he reached me, he stopped, his expression shifting, as though he was fighting something within himself. Maybe we shouldn't push this, Mom, he said quietly, his voice trembling. Maybe we need time. I nodded, feeling my own heart ache with the same conflicted emotions. You're right, Liam, I replied. We both need time to think about everything. Let's not rush this. He nodded too, and we stood there, close but cautious, like we were teetering on the edge of something neither of us could control. It felt like an ending, but also a beginning, something we couldn't quite define. As he walked away toward his room, I stood there, lost in thought. I wondered what the future would hold for us. If you'd like to hear the rest of our story, let us know in the comments below, and we'll share what happens next in part 2.